Hello and welcome to the 10th vlog by Pale Blue Thoughts. We hope you enjoyed our recent video on horoscopes. Today we continue to seek scientific evidence about astrology. We seek to find the answer to that eternal question: do celestial objects have an influence on our past, present and future? We will again start with the premise that it does. Now, one of the main things about astrology is that people born under the same zodiac sign should have similar fates.
Look at any magazine or newspaper and you will see your future predicted for your sun sign. Let's take an example to understand this in detail. Imagine two babies born at the same time, one in a super specialty hospital in the heart of Mumbai and another in a slum next to it. Definitely, two babies can be born at the same time in India. We are very efficient at this, as we all know. As there is not much difference in the distance between these two places, then the positions of the planets in the sky seen from these two places would also be the same. So should we assume a similar future for these two babies? There may be people from the slums going on to become slumdog millionaires, but on a statistical basis, how many such cases would be there? And what are the chances of these babies, one born in a premium hospital and the other in a slum, having similar futures? As per astrology and the position of the planets, they definitely should have the same future. How many Sachin Tendulkars would have been created had this been true? Even babies born at the same time in two different labor rooms may end up having completely different scenarios in life. As per the theory of astrology, this shouldn't be. This is the first problem. People born at the same place would have different futures.
Secondly, there are around 7.7 billion people in this world, but there are only 12 rashis or zodiacs. If you divide 7 billion by 12, even if we take 10 rashis to simplify, there would be still around 700 million people in one rashi. Imagine one prediction for 700 million people. The actual number is slightly less. It is around 640 million. How simple and easy our life would have been if this were true. 640 million people having similar lives. Also imagine how unpredictable is the life we actually live in. We cannot be sure if we would reach our office safe when we leave from our houses. One of the surveys says that in India, there are around 16 deaths happening every hour on our roads. How predictable our lives are, you can imagine that 16 people die in 1 hour on our roads itself. And this is where astrology predicts the same past, present and future for 640 million people. Do you see any logic here?
Third point is the consideration of the birth time. Astrologers say that the birth time has to be accurate for them to make predictions. It has to be precise to the nanoseconds as per some famous astrologers. In olden times, the birth of a child was a huge and important event. In today's modern world, it is not. Also, the birth of a child is not a special event happening at a particular point of time. A woman conceives the child months before the child is born. It is already a living being inside the mother's womb. However, the celestial objects apparently don't have any power to do anything during that time. They are all waiting patiently for the baby to show its face so that they can stand in their positions and predict the baby's future. Don't you see a problem here? These days, we have C-sections which can alter the time of birth. Are we making these planets look like fools when we take a child out earlier than when they were expecting? What about premature births then? So what we need to assume in that case is that when the child is in the mother's womb, these planets cannot do anything. They're all waiting eagerly for the child to come out so that they can write his or her history. So even after birth, if we try and cover the baby with some flesh and meat, maybe create a box made of bones and flesh, can we protect the baby from this planetary influence? That is what the mother's body really is, isn't it? Don't you see a problem in the logic of astrology?
Also, we don't understand how these astrologers still not are able to earn a fortune using this amazing skill of predictions they have. Can't they do betting in games or predict a winner in a race and earn millions? Imagine if they could accurately predict the outcome of an IPL match. Won't they earn millions? If they use their skill to invest in stock market, for instance, they could get rich very, very fast. However, you don't see them do that. Why do you think that is? James Randi is a famous magician who is a front runner when it comes to proving pseudosciences, paranormal and supernatural powers wrong. The $1 million paranormal challenge was an offer by the James Randi Educational Foundation to pay out $1 million to anyone who could demonstrate a supernatural or paranormal ability under agreed upon scientific testing criteria. A version of the challenge was first issued in 1964. The challenge was terminated in 2015 because no one could win the $1 million. Also, James Randi is very old now. He is in his 90s, but let me tell you, he remains as streetwise as ever. We highly recommend listening to his speeches that he made at Google and TED. He is amusingly funny. Anyways, over 1,000 people applied to take it, but none were successful. He asked them to prove simple things like putting a dollar note inside an envelope and the person has to guess the note. The only thing is there would be experts who would be watching the whole thing. And he is a very qualified magician, so you cannot take these small tricks to him. He will make you look like a complete idiot if you do so. No Indian astrologer has taken up the challenge when it was there. Looks like none of our astrologers are greedy for $1 million. Wow.
Okay, coming back to the science of astrology. Astrologers still insist that there is a force that is there in the universe, and that is the force that the planets apply on us. Now in science, all forces have something called as the distance effect. Take any physical influence in this world. This effect always comes into play. The light from a candle would depend on how far are you standing from the candle. How much heat you would feel from a heater also depends on the distance. Take any of the four forces that we know of, be it the strong and weak nuclear forces, gravity, or the electromagnetic force. The force decreases with increasing distance. So do these astrologers consider distance of these so-called influencing planets from the Earth while predicting anything? Let's take an example of Mars. The distance between Earth and Mars ranges from 5.5 crore kilometers to 40 crore kilometers, since these two planets revolve around the Sun in different orbits and at different speeds. So does the planetary influence on human life vary when it comes closest to the Earth at 5.5 crore kilometers and farthest at 40 crore kilometers? Sadly, no. This major factor of the difference in distance is not even considered by astrology. So now they can argue that this is a special kind of influence and distance doesn't matter here. If they do, here they fall into the next pit. So if distance is not to be considered in this influence, there are today millions of other celestial objects that were not discovered when astrology was designed.
What about the size effect? You also know that size influences many of the forces. A lorry and a car traveling at the same speed will cause different damages if they hit your vehicle. Is the size effect considered in astrology? No, again. if they claim that they have considered Saturn and Jupiter and the Sun, then we can ask, so what about Neptune and Uranus? If distance and size is not a problem, won't these guys influence us? There are around 80 moons for Saturn, some of them as big as any planet. There are 79 moons for Jupiter, some of them much larger than the Earth and other planets. Shouldn't they influence us? If we take the entire solar system, there is said to be more than 200 billion stars. If they start to put all that within 12 squares, they would run out of space. And what about planets and stars in the other galaxies? If we disregard the distance and size effect, then the universe is a vast playground and there is no dearth for distance and size.
A funny thing to discuss here is that the Western astrologers made some amendments when science discovered Uranus, Neptune and Pluto, and they added it to their natal charts. They went on with the routine predictions as usual. Then suddenly, one day, the International Astronomical Union decided to remove Pluto from the list of planets. Now the Western astrologers were in a fix. They then had to rework their charts again. But they rationalized it by saying, well, Pluto is there, right? It's still there, whether it is a planet or not. So it will influence us as usual. The same logic should have been applied to the other celestial objects like Ceres, Europa, Ganymede and other universes. However, they don't do that. Our Indian astrologers, meanwhile, never bothered to include Neptune and Uranus. The funny and illogical thing to note here is that the Western astrology, with its two new planets, and the Indian astrology, without those planets, work just the same. This brings us to conclude that it is not the planets that influence us. Even if all the planets disappeared tomorrow, the astrologers would still continue their prediction business.
Now when it comes to astrology, we see another curious thing. It is the shape of the various objects in the zodiac. From a certain position on Earth, a group of stars might look like the head of a lion. So we name it Leo for easier understanding. A group of stars might look like the head of a bull. So we name it Taurus. Libra looks like a scale and so forth. Now the next illogical thing that the astrologers do is to attribute features of these patterns to the star pattern. This is classical fallacy called doctrine of signatures. And that is why walnuts become good for your brain and kidney beans good for your kidneys. And the horn of a rhino becomes a good medicine to treat erectile dysfunctions. We see the same illogic applied here. So people born in Leo are fearless. Librans are balanced people and people born in Taurus are stubborn. Venus is one of the brightest objects in the sky and hence it was attributed with beauty, love and marriage. The funny thing here is that if you looked at this pattern from another position, say from Mars, it might look completely different. The bull might appear like a dog perhaps. So Martian astrologers may assign loyalty to the same pattern. So attributing features to a pattern depends on how we perceive it. Had astrology been created today, we might have seen cars, mobiles, Coke bottles instead of bulls, bears and water bearers. The people of yesteryears used what was available to them to identify a pattern and cooked up a story to remember them. The astrologers fell for the doctrine of signatures and attributed features for those patterns.
Now let's take another scenario. The earth is not spinning straight up. It is spinning like a top. Also, the axis of the earth is not steady. It has a 23-degree tilt to the imaginary axis. And because of this, the rotational axis also changes orientation. This is called precession. However, this is a slow change. It takes about 26,000 years for the precession to come to a full circle. The rotation of the axis has a big influence on the zodiac. Let us see how. We mentioned before that the pole star is the star which is right above this imaginary axis. Today, the pole star is a star called Polaris. However, during the 4th to 2nd centuries BCE, it was a star called Thuban. So the pole star that they considered and what we considered has changed. This change is very slow, and hence people of those times did not know about it. However, we know it now. In another few thousands of years, it would move to another star called Vega. All this happens because of the change in the rotational axis or precession. When the pole star changes, the entire zodiac also shifts. So what we consider as planetary positions now, if you base it against what was written thousands of years ago, it would be completely off track. We will help you with an example. Vishu is a festival that is celebrated in Kerala. It is considered a festival because it is supposed to fall on the summer equinox. Summer equinox is a day when the day and night have the same duration. However, there has been a shift of 23 days in the equinox due to this change in the zodiac. It is now on 22nd of March. However, people in Kerala still celebrate Vishu on 14th of April as usual because the astrologers have not made the change in their Panchangas. There is a particular yellow flower which used to bloom during Vishu called the Kanikonna or Cassia fistula. These days, I have heard many people complain that the Kanikonna blooms much earlier and you don't get these flowers during Vishu. They blame the poor flowers and the environment, whereas the actual problem lies elsewhere. These flowers have not heard of astrology and hence bloom during the correct equinox as per their biological clock.
Are you skeptical even now? Okay, let us hit the final nail then. If you take a horoscope and after many years ask a Jyotishi to identify whether this is a planetary position of a baby or of a birth of a cat or a dog or a construction of a building, they won't be able to tell you that. Nor will they be able to identify if the horoscope belongs to a male or a female. They also won't be able to tell you whether the person is dead or alive. All this would have to be mentioned separately. But they will be able to tell you details about your wife, in-laws, children, neighbors, and your diseases. They can tell if your wife would be beautiful, whether you will have baldness, or whether you will get skin rashes, or whether you will get cancer around 60 years of age. Isn't this a bit outlandish?
All throughout this video, we have maintained that there is something in astrology. However, it has failed to give us any positive answers to the questions that we have posed. We will look at some studies that have been conducted on astrology in our next episode. And we will look at one more crucial impact of astrology, Chova Dosham or Manglik Dosha. If you still haven't found convincing answers that it is a pseudoscience, please watch our next episode where we will address the question, but doesn't astrology work? We will see how astrology works in our next vlog. Until then, it's bye-bye from us.